Hello, I'm Deborah Chung. I'd like to share with you today a slice of history in my mother, Rebecca Chan Chung, 1920 to 2011. Two of my great-great-grandfathers were Reverend Chau and Reverend Wan, and they were in southern China at the end of the Qing dynasty. This is Reverend Chau. He was the first Chinese ordained minister of the Methodist Church in southern China. And southern China, mainly Canton, now called Guangzhou, pretty close to Hong Kong. And Guangzhou or Canton looked like this in the 1880 and looked like this in 1919. Reverend Chau's church is shown here. And this is him, and that's him. He served for 39 years till he was 90 years old. And note the Qing dynasty hairstyle with kind of no hair in front, but a lot of hair and a pigtail at the back. This is Hong Kong in 1868. It was British at that time. A son of Reverend Chau married a daughter of Reverend Wan. So this is the son, this is the daughter, and they made their family in Hong Kong. And Mr. Chau was the Chinese teacher of missionaries. And this is one of their daughters, Sun Chau, in Hong Kong, and she is my maternal grandmother. One of the biggest problems for Chinese women at that time was foot binding. Terrible, terrible. And there was this great need to promote the education of women. So Miss Wan, with the permission of the Hong Kong government, founded a school for girls in Hong Kong. She was really a woman much ahead of her time. And this is my maternal grandmother, Sun Chau, and this is her elder sister. Another big problem with Chinese women at that time was that they resisted seeing male doctors. So there was great need to train female doctors, particularly female doctors of Western medicine. So the Presbyterian Church in the US sent Dr. Fulton as a missionary to China. She spoke Cantonese, and this is her speaking to a patient before the surgery. And she founded the Hackett College of Medicine for Women in 1899 in Guangzhou or Canton. This is the first college of medicine for women in China. The curriculum was pretty tough. This is the lab work, and they also had morning exercise and also morning worship. And my maternal grandmother graduated from there, and she then became a physician in the Associated Hospital in Guangzhou or China or Canton. She married Mr. Chan, and he was a revolutionary under Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the father of modern China. They worked together in the Chinese Revolution of 1911. Preparing for the revolution was very dangerous, particularly in Hong Kong or China. So grandfather went from Hong Kong to Singapore to prepare for the Chinese Revolution. And there he founded this newspaper for promoting the revolution. Also in Singapore, he raised funds for supporting the revolution. And in Singapore, there was a chapter of the China Alliance, or China Revolutionary Alliance, headed by Dr. Sun. And Dr. Wong over here turns out to be my great uncle. And he sheltered Dr. Sun in Singapore. And this is Dr. Wan, the younger brother of Miss Wan. So he was my great uncle. Okay, he went to school together with Dr. Sun Yat-sen, and this is their school in Hong Kong. And subsequently, both studied medicine and both became doctors of Western medicine. And they had a joint clinic. This is the ad of their joint clinic back in 1894. And during the revolution, Dr. Wen sheltered Dr. Sun very, very much. And both of them were Christians, so they and some other people founded a Christian newspaper called Great Light in Hong Kong. And Dr. Sun wrote this calligraphy for the newspaper, saying that the faith and the country experiencing spring together. And both Dr. Sun and Dr. Wen attended this church in Hong Kong. It was close to the medical college where Dr. Sun studied. Now, my mother, Rebecca, was born in 1920. That's after the 1911 Chinese Revolution. She was born in Guangzhou or Canton, and it was the warlord era, meaning that it's a period in the history of the Republic of China when control of the country was divided among regional factions. So it was just a time full of riots. And so my mother took my grandmother took my mother and moved from Canton to Hong Kong, where my grandmother worked as the matron of this hospital in Hong Kong. And my mother later on attended high school here, diocesan girls' school. And every day she made a trip for an hour by bus and by ferry to get to the school from her home in the hospital. She graduated in 1938. This is her and some of her classmates. And this is her graduation paper. She graduated near the top of her class, but she volunteered not to pursue university education in order to save the family's money for her younger brother's future university education. That's her younger brother, David. University tuition was sky high at that time in Hong Kong. So instead of going to the university, my mother studied nursing. No tuition needed, and there was a stipend. And she had to spend a lot of time in the wards. And at 9 p.m., the ward's lighting was to be dimmed. And then my mother noticed a patient reading her Bible. And the patient then asked my mother, "Have you come to believe in Jesus?" And my mother said, "I believe. I've been going to church to worship God since I was a small child." And then the patient asked her, "Are you saved at this point?" And then my mother said, "If I were to leave the world now, I believe that I'm saved because I have always been a good child." And then the patient said, "What you said indicates that you are not saved yet." And then the patient read this Bible passage for her. "For it is by grace you have been saved, it's through faith. And this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." So after about 10 days of thinking, mother finally understood, and she knelt down to pray and repent. And this is a very important turning point that made possible what she did afterward. On December the 10th, 1941, 2 days after the invasion of Hong Kong by Japan, mother was given, in an emergency way, the nursing graduation certificate. Now, if she had pursued university education instead of nursing, she would have completed only 1 year of university education before having to stop the education for the war. Now, in 1940, the east coast of China was very much occupied by Japan, and the white area is not yet occupied by Japan, and it's called Free China. So after Hong Kong got occupied by Japan, lots of people, particularly the young ones, wanted to flee Hong Kong for free China, and my mother did that. A pastor led her and a group of over 100 young people to flee Hong Kong for Guangzhou by boat. And their group stood in the rain waiting from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. for the Japanese guard to allow them to cross the border. And immediately after crossing, the sun rose, shone. The sun shone, and the soaked luggage became dry in less than half an hour. And my mother really thanked God for that. And then she stayed in the Methodist church of my great-great-grandfather in Guangzhou. And she heard that nearby, her primary school Bible teacher was holding Bible studies in her home. So she wrapped her Bible in newspaper and started to walk to the nearby home. As she walked, a thief snatched her Bible, thinking that it was cookies. So she chased after the thief over several streets and finally used her umbrella to hook the thief. And the Bible was thus dropped, and she got it back. This is the typical journey of people fleeing Hong Kong for free China, from Hong Kong to Guangzhou, and by boat, by car, by train, and then by road again. And my mother lost all her luggage due to the train travel, but the Bible remained because that was hand-carried. Now, in the last leg of that travel, from Guizhou to Chongqing, which was the wartime capital of China, there was a road, but no public transportation. The only way to go was to ride on top of the goods of the trucks of the Friends Ambulance Unit, which used trucks to transport medical supplies to the hospitals in China. And they let people ride on top of the goods. Very, very dangerous. And so after a half day of dangerous journey, my mother reached Chongqing, looking like this. However, it was very, very badly bombed by Japan. Lots of lives lost. In Chongqing, my mother applied to and was accepted by the Flying Tigers in Kunming to be a nurse there. Here's Chongqing, called Chongqing at the time. And here is Kunming, okay? And Kunming is at one end of the Burma Road, which goes over the Himalayas to Burma. And Flying Tigers were at Kunming. So my mother flew from Chongqing to Kunming to join the Flying Tigers there. And this is the clinic there, and the hospital there. Very simple one-story wooden structure, my mother over here. And her immediate supervisor was Dr. Fred Manger, a lieutenant colonel. He was a missionary from a church in southern U.S. And he arrived in China back in 1909, a few decades before World War II. He spoke Shanghainese, and he founded the Huzhou General Hospital. Now, air raids of Japan occurred in Kunming Airport a lot, because that's where the Flying Tigers were located. And when that occurs, then the siren would ring, and then the nurse, like my mother, would bring these patients that could walk to the nearby air raid shelter, while the patients that could not walk would be put on stretchers and put underneath their beds. Okay? And then my mother then, with her patients, would wait at the air raid shelter until the siren softens. One time, after their return to the hospital, they were horrified by the large number of injured airmen being taken to the hospital by trucks. Okay? So the few nurses there would bandage the wounds and also administer morphine to the injured airmen. Okay? And my mother was surprised that a lot of the injury occurred at the buttocks. It turned out that the airmen had to run to the aircraft to fight in the air. Okay. However, some of them could not quite run fast enough to reach the aircraft, so they had to kind of droop down, and so the buttocks was upward and got shelled. Kunming was a beautiful city, and my mother had the chance of visiting Kunming using the army jeep. And she loved the peaches in Kunming, very famous, in fact, those peaches. And she said she could eat 10 of them at a time. That's my mother. Now, China's east coast became mostly occupied by Japan, and so the back door of China needed to be used. And that back door involved going over the Himalayas to Burma or India. And driving over the Himalayas is very, very dangerous. And the Burma Road is available, but very dangerous. It goes from China, Kunming, to Burma. Very dangerous, as you can see. And the Friends Ambulance Unit used truck convoys on the Burma Road to transport medical supplies into China. These little specks are the trucks. It's very dangerous. Lots of accidents and loss of life. About 90% of the medical supplies used by the Chinese civilians during the war was transported by the Friends Ambulance Unit. They also had medical services, not only in China, but also in Europe and North Africa. And in 1947, the Friends Ambulance Unit was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. Now, it was actually a Christian church called the Quakers. However, not long after, Japan cut off the Burma Road. So the only way out would be to fly over the Himalayas, flying across like that. This route of flying over the Himalayas is called the Hump route. It's also called the Skyway to Hell, also called Aluminum Trail. Aluminum Trail, that's because the aircraft was made by aluminum, and a lot of the aircraft crashed. So aluminum crashed aircraft was all over the place. Now, the planes were propeller planes, okay, very simple. And the communication was also very primitive, no computers. So they wouldn't know what's the weather, what's the wind speed up there. They wouldn't know. It's considered the most dangerous in the history of aviation, not only because of the propeller planes and the inadequate communication, but also because of the high mountains with the foothills of the Himalayas rising more than 15,000 feet from India in merely a few kilometers. Also strong wind and the weather. Now, the windward approach here shows that the wind goes up and then down. And so flying at 250 to 300 miles per hour, while the winds lift the planes to more than 25,000 feet. The wind just lifts the plane, and then back to 7,000 feet afterward. The downdraft is particularly dangerous because it can cause the plane to just crash down. Also, there's subtropical jet stream causing strong wind. The jet stream is due to the rotation of the Earth. In addition, there is cumulonimbus cloud, which is very dense cloud towering vertical cloud, forming hail, lightning, and even tornadoes. And that's particularly common because of the monsoons in May to September. Also, there are thunderstorms, particularly in between February and April. Also, between February and April, there was icing. And the ice has weight, okay, and that causes difficulty for the aircraft. More than 600 American planes went missing or crashed, and more than 1,000 men perished in them. And my mother joined this outfit called China National Aviation Corporation of CNAC, an outfit that collaborated with Pan Am for the Hump flights, among the commercial flights. And they were headquartered in India because China was in very bad shape at the time. So my mother joined CNAC, and this is her ID there, her badges there. And the CNAC transported medical supplies into China. And these are propeller planes, and the boarding used a simple ladder. See how primitive, just a ladder. And the pilots and mechanics, a lot of them were from the US. And this is my mother in front of her aircraft and passengers in 1943. And she flew over the Hump as a nurse for about 50 times. Inside the aircraft, there was no window. And also, walking along this aisle was a simple balancing act, nothing to hold on to. In one of the flights, the plane wobbled tremendously for about 20 minutes. And nobody knew what was going on because there was no window. And after the wobbling period, my mother walked to the cabin and asked the pilot what was going on. And the pilot told her a Japanese military plane was following them, so they had to hide between the mountain peaks as they flew. Very, very dangerous. In addition to flying, my mother kept the medical record of each CNAC employee and administered annual physical examinations. She received honorable discharge from the U.S. Army. At that time, there was no U.S. Air Force yet. And she received these U.S. World War II medals, as well as the U.S. Congressional Gold Medal. And she was given a U.S. military burial ceremony. And now back to the Battle of Hong Kong in December of 1941. I want to mention that again because my father fought there. Here shows the Japanese soldiers entering Hong Kong in their invasion. The invading Japanese forces of 35,000 faced a garrison of only 13,500, consisting of British, Indian, Canadian, and local troops. And the battle lasted only 18 days. And it started on December 8, 1941, a day after Pearl Harbor. My father, Leslie, was a gunner in the Hong Kong Volunteer Defense Corps, and he was wounded in action in this fort, the fort over there. The wound was the facial nerve being cut by shrapnel, thus affecting the mouth, an eye, and an ear. He was only 25 years old at that time. Then he went to Free China, he fled, and then went on to Calcutta for medical treatment in 1943. And there he met his future wife. Okay? And after 2 years, they were married in Calcutta. It was wartime still. The war ended in September 1945, but they were married in July. Note the broken chairs. Just 1.5 months after the wedding, father went to the U.S. for university education, so the newlyweds became separate for 3.5 years. After the end of World War II, mother moved back to China from India, along with CNAC, and she was stationed in Shanghai, Longhua Airport. And this is the medical team of CNAC stationed in that Longhua Airport. She flew to various cities to provide medical services. She also trained the air hostesses in first aid. This is the first class of air hostesses. Unfortunately, one of them died in a plane crash, and this is the second class. Mother paid for the medical school education of her brother throughout the wartime. But then she resigned from CNAC in late 48 because that was toward the end of the Civil War in China. So she returned to Hong Kong, and she reunited not only with her parents, but also with my father, who returned from the U.S. to Hong Kong after their 3.5 years of separation. And then my mother gave all of her savings to her brother for his further medical education in China. In addition, she bought land in Qingyi Island in Hong Kong for the retirement home of her parents. Although the land was inexpensive, just 7 Hong Kong cents per square foot, and she bought 50,000 square feet, she had to borrow money to be able to buy it. And this here is the Qingyi Island. It's a fishing village inside the house. Okay. After 30 years, the Hong Kong government bought the land in order to build this Qingyi Bridge. So the land sale allowed my mother to live comfortably during her retirement. What a blessing. My parents had 2 daughters. I'm the younger one on the right. And my mother in Hong Kong was pretty prominent as a nurse. She was elected the president of the Hong Kong Nurses and Midwives Association. And this is their International Nurses Day celebration in 1958. They always celebrate on May 12 because that is the birthday of Nightingale, Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing. And Nightingale became famous because of the Crimean War involving Britain, France, and Turkey, or Ottoman, fighting against Russia for Crimea. Okay, Russia lost that war. So Crimea really was a hot potato all along. In 1961, Mother was appointed by the governor of Hong Kong as a member of the Hong Kong Nursing Board. And then she was sent to Australia in 1962 for training in nursing education. After returning to Hong Kong, she became the head of the nursing school of the Tung Wah Group of Hospitals, and she trained literally a generation of nurses for Hong Kong. Also, she sang and taught Sunday school in church. This is at age 72 in Toronto at home. She was singing with me, accompanying her singing on the piano. At age 90, she was still singing in the church choir. On her last New Year's Eve in 2010, she wrote, asking the Lord for more opportunities to witness for Him. She did not ask for health or long life. She just asked for opportunities to witness for God, and God indeed has answered her prayer. And her book, Piloted to Serve, in English and also in Chinese, are available, and her story goes on to touch many lives. And I really thank God for my mother, Rebecca Chan Chung.